Hello, Stephen Andrews, Outlaw Bookseller here. It's Saturday morning. I'm slightly hungover. I had a couple of those ciders last night, which you saw me drinking at Avon in my second book hunt video. I think by the time I post this, it'll be sort of halfway through that thread on this channel, because I've just read something which has made me very, very excited and which I've been waiting for months. And even though I probably should have shaved, but it's time to grow the beard for winter, I'm wearing an old top, and as I say, I'm slightly hungover. There is no time like the present, because you never know what's going to happen in life, do you? And I want to talk this morning briefly about a new book which was published on Thursday, and that's Expect Me Tomorrow by Christopher Priest, published by Gollancz, and here it is in a handsome royal format hardcover, and very beautiful it is indeed as well. And I read the book over 2 days. Had I not been working, slaving away in the old bookshops, I'd have read it one day, probably in one sitting, because not only is it insanely readable, it's probably, for me, going to be the book of the year very easily, and easily the SF novel of the year. Also, if you're not an SF reader, you don't have to be, because Priest is one of those writers, alongside people like J.G. Ballard, who created the modern slipstream which we have today, where the techniques of literary modernism and SF were meshed together in the New Wave period and throughout the 70s and early 80s, and really sort of showed people that there was no serious schism between things, and that writers, as we moved into the modern and postmodern eras, needed to look at the way that technology and science and the post-Enlightenment worldview changed things for writers. So if you're used to reading literary fiction, then you'll have no problem with this. And just to back that up, Chris was one of the people chosen in the 1983 Best of Young British Novelists, the original Book Marketing Council thing, which Granta did an edition around. I've talked about that elsewhere on the channel. So this is a book for everybody who's an intelligent reader who likes to be challenged, but also likes very readable prose, because that's the point. So Expect Me Tomorrow. Chris has now written in the region of almost 30 books. He's had a real sort of vein of creativity the last few years. One has waited in the past as long as 5-6 years between books. And I remember particularly the long wait in between his amazing novel, The Quiet Woman, in the late 80s, and then the multiple award-winning The Prestige. In that period, interestingly, I perceived a shift in Priest's style, and I think it's remained fairly consistent since The Prestige. It was slightly different before. It was a bit more colder and brittle, and I really liked that style, but he moved into a new style. Writers have to move on and change and develop if they're to remain relevant and interesting, and relevant and interesting is something that Chris has always been. So more on his background. He was born in Manchester in 1943. Cheadle, I think, is the suburb he was born in, and he was one of the key people in British New Wave SF in the 1960s, and he's a multiple award winner of all kinds of things within SF and outside. And as Gollancz tend to say, he has an enviable reputation both inside and outside the genre. He's recognised as a major innovator, if not a massive bestseller writer, which he should be, because he's fascinating. He's easily the equal of any of the sort of obvious people, the issue gurus, the McEwans. Well, I think he's much better than both personally, but there you go. So he is somebody that you have to read if you're interested in contemporary fiction of any kind. And Expect Me Tomorrow is the new book. I'm going to plunge on as if you're familiar with his oeuvre, and something that's difficult when reviewing Chris's books is that, you know, the whole thing about spoilers. Well, with Chris's books, it's very, very hard indeed, because I'm not going to talk much about the plot or anything. I'm going to talk about the themes and the structure and that sort of thing, because what I want to do is whet your appetite. So I want you to go out and buy this book, because it really will give you a treat. It doesn't matter if you've never read Chris before. If you've read him before, you'll know what to expect and what not to expect. And if you haven't read him, you're in for a real treat. And this isn't a bad place to start, actually. For those of you familiar with the oeuvre, the book reminded me the most in terms of its structure and some of the themes of The Prestige, though it is quite different in terms of the denouement and what have you. And I really, really enjoyed it. I felt his last book, The Evidence, which has a sort of crime novel structure in a way, with the usual sort of incursions you get with his Dream Archipelago material. Those of you who've read those books will know what I mean. If you don't, I apologise. Really, there isn't a playfulness in this, but there's a kind of not circular or elliptical structure, but there's a sort of, the resolution is really interesting, because sometimes Chris is really brilliant at, you know, the resolutions which aren't resolutions, and in real life there are no resolutions. Things end or they continue, and that's it, and mostly life goes on. So expect me tomorrow. What is it about? It's a book about climate change, about technology, and it's a book about people. In the book there are two sets of twins living in different times, identical twins. The characters, those main characters, those four main characters, are all male, and two of the twins are Swedish and they live in the 19th century, and two of them are British and they live in the year 2050. So the novel spans those times. Glaciation, sunspots, volcanology, climate change, all these things are in the book, and they're fascinating. The science in this book is more prevalent in terms of detail than it is in a lot of Chris's books. He's usually a science fiction writer because he uses novums and he uses conceptual breakthrough and paradigm shift, and boy does he know how to use all these things. But the novums in this book are actual science. He draws from actual science because of the time span, and it's fascinating for anybody who's interested in climate change. And it's not an argument for or against, it's a sort of evidence. Then when you look at evidence in science and see what's happening, and it's certainly going to get me looking at more books on things like glaciation, volcanology, besides the stuff that we already know about carbon and the way the Industrial Revolution has changed things. And of course, at the moment this book starts, back in the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution hadn't been going for long, so it's very, very interesting. And the historical stuff, of course, as always, is superb in his novels. He really sort of caned that in books like The Prestige, The Space Machine, and in some early stories as well. So it has that great historical aspect. The book is told through first-person narratives, third-person narratives, the epistolary method using letters, and also because Chris has this SF background, he uses things like implants, a new means of communication through time, which is very interesting, which uses something which I wasn't expecting at all. And it's really about climate change. It's also about what happens to characters who are twins and the way they perceive things, their connections, their disconnections, and so on. And as ever, he always keeps you guessing. I don't really want to say too much more about it other than you should read it. For me, it's easily been the book of the year. Probably my book of the year until this point is Hervé Letellier's The Anomaly, which I talked about a while ago in my international SF book haul. And I've just managed to acquire a first edition of that because I did get a paperback, and I passed the paperback on to a friend to read who I know will enjoy it. So that's this is sort of certainly my book of the year. It's predictable because he is my favourite living writer. I don't see him much these days. We haven't seen each other so much the last 20 years as we did before that, when we were very close friends. He wrote a foreword for my book, 100 Must-Read Science Fiction Novels. And the last time I saw Chris was 2016, when we did an event together in Bath at a bookshop. And I think that was for The Gradual. And in that time, Chris has produced, he's produced about 4 books. He's really been prolific. And they've been fascinating. I'm just looking in the back flap here, and you can see them there in the bottom. And he's produced The Gradual, American Story, Episodes, Great Short Story Collection. He doesn't write short fiction anymore, so do snap that up. And The Evidence, and Now Expect Me Tomorrow. And the best news of all is that there's going to be another Priest book, which is at Gollancz now, undergoing editorial and preparation and what have you, which will come out next May. So we'll have 2 Priest novels in less than a year, which is unprecedented and fantastic news. And that's called Airside. And the title alone is tantalising and making me think, what's this going to be about? I really can't wait. So this covers a lot of the standard Priest themes that we've seen since the 90s. Twins, the regular sort of sleight of hand, which he's brilliant at, and things like the unreliable narrator and all this sort of thing, which Hollywood thinks it invented, and other writers think they invented. This guy was doing it decades before anybody else. That's the thing. He's a real innovator, very, very important writer indeed. So if you've not read him, you should. Something I should add is that I had an email from Chris the other day. We are back in touch, and we are talking about doing something next year, hopefully doing an event together. We are planning at least to meet up through this and to sort of renew our old acquaintanceship, because we haven't seen each other for a few years, as I say, and I'm looking forward to that because he's a great guy, and he lives right in the north of Scotland and I'm down here in the West Country. And of course we used to live fairly close together back when we first met in the 80s, So that'll be great. And once I can get the tech upgraded here, in other words, when I get a decent webcam and I can start doing Zoom type things, then, you know, Chris will probably be the first person I interview, and there'll be more to come like that. So do watch this space for that. That's my science fiction novel of the year. That's my novel of the year so far. I don't want to talk about it anymore because he's so hard to talk about without spoilers. And I was talking to a customer in work yesterday who's a fan of Dave Hutchinson, and he wasn't aware there was a new Dave Hutchinson novel coming, Cold Water, the 5th in the Fractured Europe series. And Dave's one of the few people who I think comes close to Chris. You could say there's an affinity between Philip K. Dick and Chris. Chris is a lot subtler, not to disparage Dick at all. I love Philip K. Dick, but the sort of way that both writers look at reality and question issues like subjectivity, truth, facts, objectivity, the real, the unreal, all those phenomenological questions is there writ large. And this is why he's so important, because it really does make you think about your intersection with the rest of reality and perception and what it is. So it's fundamentally important stuff. The writing is clean, flat, clear prose, Orwellian. The meanings are never obfuscated. There's no excessive verbosity for its own sake. And that wonderful clear style allows the ideas, the relationships, and the wonderful twists and things to come through beautifully. So it's an entrancing, seductive experience reading this book, as it is with all of Chris's books. And like I say, I'm biased, but I never read anybody who excites me as intellectually as much as Chris does. And he's emotionally affecting as well. He's really good at depicting relationships, particularly filial ones and close family ones, and also of conflicts as well, which is a really important thing, because without conflict of drama, without drama, you don't have good fiction. So let's expect me tomorrow. I'm aware I've rambled a bit, but I've read the book very quickly. I've taken it in. I'm very excited by it. I will be reading it again probably within the next few months. But I say to you, go out now and buy it, because it is the SF novel of the year and the mainstream novel of the year. It's the novel of the year, easily said. I've got other things to read which have just come out. I've got the new Tom McCarthy. There's a Cormac McCarthy coming out later this year. But I'll be very surprised if anything comes close for me this year. So this is Stephen E. Andrews, Outlaw Bookseller, signing out for now. Bye.